Hey guys, and welcome to Season 2 Stormclaw. Right out of the gate, the biggest difference is we're actually going to focus on lightning damage for the first time in the build. We've always had it there, but I wanted to get more of it in there with the new glyphs. Just for reference, the electrocution glyph they added gives 554.4% additive damage and 20% multiplicative damage just in the glyph. So we're maximizing the potential with this by getting lightning bolts out the yin yang, but we're still getting that same juicy fast attack speed and damage we got from the original Stormclaw. Now I've got to emphasize that this build is going to be broken this season. It was strong before, but they added so many vampiric abilities that benefit Stormclaw, it's insane. Moonrise, 160% basic skill damage. That's a crazy amount. Stack up to 20% attack speed and 15% movement speed. In the past, movement speed was good for this build, but only for the movement. Now we've got Ravenous. Ravenous is increasing our attack speed based on our movement speed, and that is like an 80% attack speed increase. And with attacks that fast, we're never going to be able to die because we have Undying. This is going to be healing us constantly, 6% of our life every single time we swipe. And with Undying, we're not going to be able to die. We're going to be healing 6% of our life every swipe, sometimes more when we get our double swipe. Think about that on a boss like Duriel, that is probably going to have a lot of damage over time. We'll probably just be able to heal through it. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the build. First up, I'm going to go through the skill breakdown. So we use Claw. Because we have Great Staff of the Crone, we're allowed to use Claw and Storm Strike at the same time. That means we're using 2 basic skills instead of 1. Not only that, but Storm Strike is getting 150% the effectiveness of a normal Storm Strike. In addition, we're using Hurricane for damage reduction. It also puts out a decent amount of damage. We've also got Blood Howl. This heals us, gives us an attack speed buff, and it activates our Vigilance passive so that we get more damage reduction. Next up, we've got Cyclone Armor. This is just a nice passive damage reduction, and it's kind of a get out of jail free card if you get trapped by enemies. But if I were to change anything in this build, this would probably be the one. It has a lot more wiggle room. Next up, we've got Trample. This is our only source of Unstoppable in this build, as it is right now. So you save this in case you need it to break out a CC. They heavily reduce the amount of CC that enemies do in Season 2, so hopefully we don't run into too much of an issue with this. Next up, we've got Cataclysm. Cataclysm does a ton of damage. It also makes enemies vulnerable, and on top of that, it casts lightning bolts, which we're getting a lot of power from in this build. For the Spirit Boons, we're going with Wariness, Iron Feather, Calamity, Combo for the Storm, and Overload. The only one I would consider changing here is possibly removing Combo for the Storm if you feel like it's not proccing enough, and tossing it into Pack Leader. If you do that, you can pull Cyclone Armor out, run Poison Creeper, and get an extra 20% critical strike chance pretty regularly. Honestly, the only reason I don't do this is because there's a little bit of a cast time on Poison Creeper, and I feel like it kind of interrupts my flow. But overall, it's a good choice. Now, I didn't include the endgame uniques here, except for the Great Staff of the Crone, because Great Staff of the Crone is the most required for the build. However, you can run a one-handed and an offhand if you want to do the build early. Especially in this version of the build, where you're relying more on those lightning bolts, you don't have to worry about the basic attacks nearly as much. But I still highly recommend doing this build, especially if you have the Great Staff of the Crone. In addition to that, the helm and the chest piece should be Tempest Roar and Mad Wolf's Glee, and I still need to test Harlequin's Crest and Adariel's Visage later down the road. All of those could be really good options. But for now, we've got Vigorous Aspect on the helmet, Aspect of Might on the chest piece, Overcharged Aspect on the gloves, Aspect of Disobedience on the pants, Craven Aspect on the boots, Great Staff of the Crone as our weapon, Runeworker's Conduit on our amulet. I still need to test this once the season starts, but I think this might be our best choice for our amulet slot. But it never hurts to fall back on Rapid as the amulet slot, because attack speed is just really good for this build. Speaking of which, Rapid Aspect on Ring 1, and Mighty Storm's Aspect on Ring 2. In the past, Earth and Might was never the best choice for Stormclaw, because the build was focused around specifically Werewolf skills. But now we have a ton of Lightning Bolts, Cataclysm, Hurricane, and we want to scale those as much as possible, so getting guaranteed crits on all of those different things is much better than going for one of the other passes. On the helmet, we're going to go with basic skill attack speed, cooldown reduction, maximum life, and all stats. For the chest armor, we're going to go with maximum life, damage while shapeshifted, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, and damage reduction from close enemies. For the gloves, we're going to go with attack speed, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and critical strike damage with werewolf skills. On the pants, we're going with maximum life, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, and damage reduction from close enemies. On the boots, we're going with movement speed, total armor while in werewolf form, all stats, and willpower. If you don't have Great Staff of the Crone, on the weapon, we're going to be doing damage to close enemies, all stats, ultimate skill damage, and damage to distant enemies. For our amulet, we're going with ranks 2 and venom passive, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, cooldown reduction, and movement speed. On ring 1, we're going with damage to close enemies, lucky hit chance, maximum life, and critical strike chance. And we're actually doing the same stats in both rings. For our offhand, we're going damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and cooldown reduction. Keep in mind that I have damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned in a lot of these items. I'm doing that with the thought in mind of having Tempest Roar and Mad Wolf's Glee when I do that. So if you do have a lot of damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, do what I mentioned earlier and swap Cyclone out for Poison Creeper. Poison Creeper tends to be really strong in the early game anyways, so it's a good choice. Mobalytics is glitched out right now, but for the gems, we're going Emerald or Topaz on the weapon, Ruby on the armor, and Diamonds for the accessories, but you can also go Skulls if you don't need the extra resistance. For our Vampiric powers, we're going with Moonrise, Hectic, Anticipation, Ravenous, and Undying. Anticipation reduces our ult cooldown by quite a bit, and the more enemies we've poisoned, the stronger our ult will be when we cast it, which is why having Tempest Roar to spread that poison around easier is going to be a nice choice. Hectic is going to help us with all of our cooldowns. We'll be attacking so quickly that we shouldn't have issues with any of our cooldowns. And then we've got Undying. Undying is going to be healing us 6% of our life every single time we swipe. If we happen to trigger that double swipe, that is 12%. If we happen to be under 50% life, that can go up to 24% of our life in one hit. That's almost a fourth. That's crazy. Now for our skill rotations, we're going to engage with the enemies after casting Hurricane and Cataclysm. We're going to begin swiping the enemies with Claw, and that's going to cause us to get a bunch of resets on our skill cooldowns, do a bunch of damage, cause lightning bolts, all that fun stuff. We're going to use Bloodhowl regularly to activate our Vigilance passive, and it's also going to top off our health, even though we probably won't need it with our healing. We're going to hold on to Trample, and we're only going to use it to break out a CC. We should have enough movement speed that we don't feel the need to use it for movement. And I should probably note this down here, but Cyclone Armor is used to break out of enemies if they happen to body block you. This build scales extremely well with Lucky Hit Chance. We have a lot of Lucky Hit Chance in the build, from our Spirit Boons, to our Keystone passive, our Aspects, and even some Uniques. Especially if we throw on Fists of Fate to fight some bosses, we're going to be very happy we have a lot of Lucky Hit Chance. Now an important note for this build, damage to close enemies and damage to distant enemies scales with our Storm Paragon node. Thunderstruck now gives a 50% multiplier that is equal to half of whatever our damage to close enemies and our damage to distant enemies total is. So we're able to stack additive damage to increase a multiplicative multiplier. Obviously, as a Stormclaw build, damage to close enemies is far more important, but it doesn't hurt if we have damage to distant enemies. For our skill tree, assuming that we have the Great Staff for the Crone, we're going to be maxing out Claw and getting Wild Claw, maxing out Storm Strike and getting Fierce Storm Strike, moving down, grabbing 2 points in Predatory Instinct and 3 points in Digital Grade Gate, moving down again, getting 1 point in Cyclone Armor and preserving Cyclone Armor, maxing out Ancestral Fortitude, Vigilance, putting 1 point into Bloodhowl, and 1 point in preserving Bloodhowl, 3 points in Nature's Reach, and then under the Wrath tree, we're getting 1 point in Hurricane, 1 point in Savage Hurricane, 1 point in Trample, we're maxing out Endless Tempest, maxing out Bad Omen, maxing out Electric Shock, and just putting 1 point in Charged Atmosphere. Down below, we're going to max out Envenom, and we're going to put 1 point in Toxic Claws. If you're using Tempest Roar, it might be more valuable to add a couple points into Toxic Claws from somewhere else. Moving down to our ultimate, we're grabbing Cataclysm and both points there. And finally, our Keystone passive is Earth and Might. Keep in mind that Earth and Might won't do you any good if you don't have the aspect that allows our Storm skills to activate it. Now, for the Paragon boards, our first node is going to be Electrocution. This is the new glyph that we talked about. And as you can see here, we got all of the willpower. All 70 willpower is dumped into this one. That is a massive multiplier. I think it was 500 and some odd percent, 550. Not to mention enemies take 20% more damage from you. We're getting all the rare nodes here, and then we're moving up, and we're going to be putting Fang and Claw into the Heightened Malice board. We're going to get all the rare nodes that are close to our path, and we're going to grab Heightened Malice in the top right here. Over to the left, we're putting the Thunderstruck board, and we're going to grab the Spirit Glyph. Again, we grab any rare nodes that are on our path, and we're grabbing the Thunderstruck Legendary node. This is very important to the build, so make sure you get here as soon as possible. We're not going to move up just yet. We're actually going to move to the right, go past our Heightened Malice board to Inner Beast. Here we're going to grab the rare nodes on our path, and we're going to be putting Werewolf here. Werewolf doesn't give you a lot of damage, so we're only putting the bare minimum number of points here in order to get the damage reduction. Moving to the right again, we're grabbing the Constricting Tendrils board, but we're not getting the Legendary node. We're going to be grabbing the Territorial Glyph here, both rare nodes, and we are maxing out every single dexterity on this board. This ends up being a lot of damage to close enemies. And don't forget, that scales with our Thunderstruck node. Now if we zoom out, we can see that we have one more board here. In the very top left, we have the Ancestral Guidance board, and we're just going to move up, grab the rare node here, and a couple of extra points. There's a lot of basic skill damage, and we're not worried about the bonus here. We don't do any core damage in this build. As for the glyph, we're putting Fulminate here. Don't forget that if you're not getting all of your bonuses, you can go to your board, move some points around. See here, I just took off the dex and I put intelligence there. Or I could put the dex back and remove the intelligence and just put my point back in, and we're done. That's how you can rearrange some points in order to get your bonuses exactly perfect. I would do this for you, but each person's build is a little different, so you gotta work with the gear you get. This is the strongest that the Stormclaw build has been since the game launched. Season 2 is definitely the season of Stormclaw. It's possible that I'll come through and change some stuff after I get my hands on it, but as always, I'll update my mobilytics guides, which you can find in my Discord server at discord.gg/screamheart. And if I change anything really substantial, I'll make another video about it soon. Speaking of videos, if you haven't seen my Infinite Lacerate build, it is a completely unique take on a Druid build. So hit that like button, comment on the video, and go check out the other one. I'll see you guys in the next one. Daddy Druid out.
My plan is working.